Welcome to the Deep Dive. You sent us your sources, and now we're pulling out the core insights. Think of it as your shortcut to getting seriously well-informed.
And today, we're tackling the origins of a really foundational place, Plato's Academy. We're using the text you shared, a Philosophia de Platon e Academia.
Right, and Plato's influence is not just his dialogues, amazing as they are.
Yeah, exactly. It's also his student, Aristotle, obviously. But crucially, it's this educational, organization he started, the Academy.
These three things, dialogues, Aristotle, the Academy, they're all tangled up together, aren't they?
Deeply interwoven. You really need all three to get the full picture of his impact on, pretty much all of Western thought.
Okay, so let's set our mission for this deep dive. We want to understand the world the Academy came from, what it was trying to do initially, and how it actually developed in those early years.
Yeah, and maybe uncover some surprising bits, like its connection to earlier Athenian life and, the very start of its huge legacy.
So where do we begin? Ground level.
Let's start with the name itself, Academia. It actually refers to a specific area northwest of Athens near the Cephissus River.
And this place was significant even before Plato showed up.
Oh, yeah. It had a history. Even the origin of the name is a bit murky, which is interesting in itself.
The text mentioned a few possibilities, didn't it? Academos? Maybe Hecademos?
Right, some kind of local hero.
Yeah.
Or maybe even Equidemos. Gives it this legendary feel from the get-go.
Blurs that line between myth and history.
It does. And geographically, think of it bordered by Hippios Kolonos and the Kerameikos district.
Kerameikos. The pottery district, right?
That's the one. So its location connects it to nature, the river, but also to the craft and daily life of the city.
Now, this is really interesting. This area, the Academia, it wasn't just empty land waiting for Plato. It had already changed quite a bit.
Definitely. It started, apparently, as a sacred grove, which kind of fits with the hero name,
Makes sense.
Then it evolved, got a religious precinct, but then it shifted more towards civic use.
So
Possibly in the late 6th century BCE, maybe under the tyrant Hipparchus, a public gymnasium was built there.
a gymnasium. So like for sports.
Yes, but crucially, not just for sports. This is important. These early gymnasia were becoming multifunctional spaces.
Okay. What else happened there?
Religious rituals, intellectual discussions alongside the physical training. It reflected big shifts in Athenian education, politics, culture.
And Athens was attracting thinkers from all over, right?
Exactly. Philosophers, sophists, they needed places to meet, talk, teach. These gymnasia became natural hubs. And Hipparchus probably built it partly to gain favor in Kerameikos. Smart politics.
So this was all happening way before Plato got seriously involved. Then the Persian Wars must have shaken things up. Xerxes burning Athens.
Huge disruption.
Yeah.
Afterwards, Themistocles rebuilt the city walls, which actually cut through the Kerameikos district, splitting it.
And how did that affect the Academy area?
Well, later, Simon is said to have really developed it, turned it into, like, a proper public park and gymnasium.
With amenities.
Apparently so. Water supply, running tracks, nice shaded walkways, making it a really established, significant public space for Athenians.
You can almost picture it. And getting there from Athens, it sounds like a bit of a journey.
Yeah, you'd go out through the Dipylon Gate, leave the inner city.
Into the outer Kerameikos.
Right, and you'd walk through this large cemetery area. It's quite a juxtaposition, isn't it? This place of life and learning next to a major burial ground.
Thucydides called that area the most beautiful suburb, didn't he? Where war heroes were buried.
He did, except the ones from Marathon, they got buried on the battlefield. But yeah, Pausanias later confirms that tombs, sanctuaries, altars, and the gymnasium, all in that area.
To really get a feel for it before Plato, though, that bit from Aristophanes' The Clouds is fantastic, from 423 BCE.
It really paints a picture, contrasts the Academy's sort of rustic beauty, as the text says, with the noisy, argumentative agora.
He mentions olive trees, garlands, running tracks.
Yeah, the scent of smilax, poplar catkins, the sound of the plane tree whispering to the elm. It's very evocative. He's setting up this contrast between traditional education there and the garrulous and sophisticated values of the city center.
Almost romanticized. But it makes you wonder, was the Academy really free of sophistry then? Or is Aristophanes maybe being a bit ironic?
That's a good question. The text suggests some uncertainty there. It's maybe not so clear-cut.
And we should also remember this idyllic scene wouldn't last uninterrupted. The Spartans eventually occupied the area, right?
Yeah, during the siege of Athens at the very end of the 5th century, that would have definitely disrupted things.
Okay, so the Academy location had this really rich, evolving history. Let's pivot a bit to Athenian education more broadly before Plato. The source talks about paideia.
Right, paideia, crucial term. It's not just formal school. It's the whole upbringing, the culture, how you become a proper Athenian citizen.
And traditionally, it was split in two.
Yeah, basically. Malsiko, that's the cultural side. Poetry, singing, playing instruments, literature, and gymnastic. Physical education, wrestling, athletics.
And this was mostly privately funded back then, not like a state system.
Correct. In the archaic and classical periods, your family paid. Though public spaces like gymnasia played a role, especially for physical training.
Did they learn reading and writing?
Yes, that got added in the classical period. Basic literacy and arithmetic became part of elementary education.
But paideia was broader still.
Much broader. Participating in religious festivals, going to the theater, hearing debates in the assembly, that was all part of your education, your enculturation.
This is what Aristophanes might call the ancient education. But then things started changing in the 5th century BCE.
Big time. Athens became wealthy, powerful, a real magnet. Philosophers and sophists started arriving.
Who are we talking about?
Well, you had Anaxagoras connected to Pericles. Parmenides and Zeno visited. Protagoras, another famous sophist, also linked with Pericles. Gorgias, the superstar rhetorician, arrived in 427 BCE.
Gorgias taught rhetoric for money.
He did.
Right.
Taught people like Isocrates and Tisthenes how to be persuasive. It was a valuable skill.
So you have all these thinkers coming in, teaching new things, often for fees. That must have clashed with the traditional paideia.
It definitely caused friction. You see it documented, like you said, in Aristophanes and Plato's dialogues. These itinerant teachers were supplementing but also disrupting the old ways.
And where did they teach?
Public places, mostly. The agora, sure, but also those three main gymnasia, the academy, the cynosarges, the lyceum. They'd give presentations, try to attract paying students.
The real marketplace of ideas. And then there's Socrates, always a complex figure.
Very. Aristophanes paints him almost as a sophist in the clouds, which is quite different from Xenophon's or Plato's portrayal.
But Socrates didn't charge fees, did he?
No, that's a key distinction. And he didn't claim to teach a specific doctrine like the sophists often did, but he definitely had his circle, his associates.
And they met up for discussions.
Regularly. Often in these same public spaces, the gymnasia and palaestrae. Plato's dialogues mention Socrates at the Lyceum in the Euthyphro, at a wrestling school near the Academy in the Lysis, debating sophists in the Lyceum in the Euthydemus.
So even before Plato formally set up shop, as it were, these gymnasia were already buzzing with philosophy.
Absolutely. They were established intellectual hotspots by the late 5th century, maybe even earlier. That's the backdrop for Plato starting the Academy.
Okay, so let's zoom in on Plato's time. The Academy, Lyceum, cynosarges, already intellectual hubs. Plato, being from an aristocratic family, would have known these places.
Almost certainly. He'd have gone for exercise, like others of his class, but also for the conversations, especially with Socrates.
And after Socrates died in 399 BCE.
Plato continued associating with other Socratics, Cratylus, Hermogenes, Euclides. He might have even stayed in Megara with Euclides for a while. He wasn't isolated.
Then, around the same time Plato's Academy is getting going, others are setting up too.
Exactly. You have Isocrates, who was taught by Gorgias, setting up his school near the Lyceum around 390 BCE, and Antisthenes, another Socratic, holding discussions at the cynosarges.
So Plato's Academy wasn't totally unique in that sense.
No, it's important to see it in context. It was one of several new educational ventures popping up in 4th century Athens, even if it became the most famous.
And nailing down the exact start date is tough.
Very tough. Sometime after his first trip to Syracuse, so maybe between 387 and 383 BCE, but we shouldn't imagine, a formal opening ceremony or incorporation papers.
It wasn't like founding a university today.
Not at all. It's probably more accurate to picture Plato starting to gather a regular group of philosophical friends and collaborators at the Academy in the late 390s, and it just gradually grew in strength and reputation through the 380s and 370s.
Okay, let's talk location and funding. Plato is from Callido, a wealthy area. Was that near the Academy?
Reasonably near. Callido was southwest of the Acropolis, inside the city walls. The Academy was maybe a few kilometers away outside the Dipylon Gate, so moving his focus there was a definite choice.
It wasn't that remote from the city center.
No, not really. About 6 stades, maybe a mile to the Dipylon Gate, then another 3 stades or so to the Agora. Accessible.
Yeah. And he used the public facilities there, the gym, the paths.
Yeah, seems he used the existing public gymnasium, walkways, buildings for teaching and discussions. but it was still semi-public space.
Meaning people could wander in, listen, maybe even heckle?
Potentially, yes. It wasn't a closed-off campus, and Plato himself probably didn't live inside the sacred precinct or the gymnasium. Citizens didn't live there.
So where did he live?
Most scholars think he bought private property nearby, a house with its own garden adjacent to the public academy area.
Ah, so the activity spilled over between the public space and his private home.
Exactly. Discussions, maybe shared meals, likely happened in both spots, which probably explains why later writers sometimes just call his house and group the academy. It gets a bit blurred.
And funding.
Yeah.
His family was well off, he said.
Yes, he had at least moderate wealth, enough to pursue philosophy. And crucially, like Socrates, he didn't charge tuition. That's a big difference from Isocrates or the Sophists.
But the people associated with him still needed to live. And did Plato need funds for, say, the property?
Good question. The sources mention possible help from wealthy patrons. Dion of Syracuse, maybe Anistarchus of Cyrene, possibly helped him buy that property near the academy.
Dion seems quite important.
Diogenes Laertius mentions Dion covering Plato's expenses sometimes, even buying him expensive Pythagorean books. And Dionysius of Syracuse supposedly gave Plato a huge sum, 80 talents.
Wow. So maybe Plato's trips to Syracuse weren't just about politics.
Possibly not just politics. Maybe also about securing patronage, funding for the whole philosophical enterprise at the academy.
And he wasn't alone there from the start. He had associates early on.
Seems so. The mathematician, Theodotus of Athens, was likely involved early, maybe in the late 390s.
And buying that property near the academy, after visiting Dion, that's often seen as a key step, right? A 387 or 383 BCE.
Yeah, that's often flagged as a sort of marker for the academy's establishment, even if it wasn't a founding in our sense.
But still not a legal entity.
No, and this is really key. Unlike later schools, like Theophrastus's or Epicurus's, whose will specifically set up trusts for their school's property and continuity.
Plato's will didn't mention the academy like that.
Correct. Diogenes Laertius records his will, and it deals with his personal property, but doesn't establish the academy as an ongoing institution with assets. Its success seems much more tied to Plato himself.
More like a movement centered on him than a formal school building? Okay, so what did they actually do there? What subjects? Who was involved? How did they teach?
Well, judging by the diverse figures associated with it, people like Eudoxus, Speusippus, Xenocrates, Aristotle himself, the structure was probably pretty loose, emergent.
Meaning Plato encouraged different viewpoints.
It certainly looks that way. Discussion of alternatives seems to have been welcome. Membership didn't seem to require signing up to a strict Platonic doctrine, more Socratic in spirit maybe than sophistic.
So not about learning dogma, but about the process of inquiry.
That seems to be the emphasis. And our best guides to what they inquired into are Plato's dialogues themselves, plus what we know about the people there.
Should we even call them teachers and students in our sense?
It's tricky. The Greek terms used are varied. Methodes, learner, Sonadoves, associate, heteros, companion, philos, friend, suggests different kinds of relationships, not a rigid hierarchy.
But the dialogues were definitely used.
Oh, almost certainly. Studied, read aloud probably, discussed, maybe even circulated to attract others.
And the range of topics in the dialogues is huge.
Absolutely. Mathematics in the Republic, Timaeus, Theaetetus, political theory, Republic, statesmen, laws, language, logic, sophistry, Cratylus, Gorgias, sophist, metaphysics, Parmenides, sophist. It reflects the breadth of interest.
And you can link dialogue themes to people present.
Yes. Mathematics links to Theaetetus and Eudoxus of Cnidus. Astronomy and maths to Philip of Opus, who apparently edited Plato's laws after his death.
And then there's Aristotle. He was there for a long time.
20 years. From 367 until Plato died in 347, came as a young man from Stagira. His long stay tells us a lot.
Like Plato being open to challenge.
Must have been. And the Academy's reputation was clearly growing, attracting top minds. Aristotle reportedly taught rhetoric there, researched it.
Did he start writing his own stuff there?
Very likely. Many of his surviving works probably originated in his Academy years. Maybe even some biology, though that wasn't Plato's main focus. And Aristotle constantly refers back to Plato's dialogues, shows how central they were.
Mostly men involved.
Overwhelmingly. But Diogenes Laertius does list two women, Lasthenia of Mantinea and Axiothea of Phlius, which is remarkable for the time.
So it's a research community, a discussion hub. But was there a political angle too?
Yes, definitely a political dimension. Plutarch says Academy members got involved in practical politics, revolutions, writing laws, advising rulers.
And Plato himself in Syracuse.
Exactly. And maybe advising rulers in Atarneus and Assos, too, according to the letters attributed to him. So while not just a political training school, they weren't ivory tower philosophers totally detached from the world. Theory and practice were connected.
So discussions happened in the public gym, in Plato's house. Any anecdotes about the teaching style?
Well, there's Aristophanes' story about Plato giving a public lecture on the good that apparently bombed. People expected practical advice and got abstract metaphysics and mathematics.
Huh. Maybe not the best public communication strategy.
Perhaps not. And there's that funny fragment from the comic poet Epicrates describing Plato and some associates trying to dialectically define
A pumpkin.
a pumpkin, seriously.
Yep.
He shows them engaged in that Socratic method of definition, maybe even in a slightly playful way.
So methods likely included dialectic, lectures, research, writing, reading dialogues, a mix.
Seems the most likely picture. A combination of approaches for philosophical investigation and instruction.
But here's a weird thing. Plato himself never mentions the academy in his dialogues or letters.
Isn't that striking? The word academy appears only twice in the whole Platonic corpus, and both times it just means the gymnasium, the place, not his school or organization.
Which brings us back to the difficulty of calling it a school.
Exactly. What word do we use? Diogenes Laertius uses heresis, which means choice, like choosing a way of life, a philosophical sect.
More commitment than just enrolling.
Right. And the head, the scholarch, connects to scholi, meaning leisure, the leisure to think. Another term is diatria, spending time together.
Maybe Aristophanes' term was best. Frontisterian.
Think tank. It actually captures that sense of active, collective inquiry pretty well, doesn't it? Especially for its evolving nature during Plato's life.
Think tank. I like it. Okay, so what happened after Plato died in 347 BCE?
He died aged about 80. Diogenes Laertius says he was buried in the academy, which fits with it being a place for memorials, even if not residence. Pausanias later saw a memorial nearby.
And his continuation wasn't guaranteed.
Probably not. We see academy as enduring now, but back then, after the founder died, they had to figure out how to keep it going, define its identity.
How did they do that?
The main way we track it is through the succession of leaders, the scholarchs. Diogenes gives a list. Plato's nephew Speusippus took over first.
Then Xenocrates, Polemo, Crates, quite a line.
Yeah, then Arcesilaus, Lysiades. It goes on for centuries, down to Carneades and Clitomachus in the 2nd century BCE.
And Cicero mentions later figures too.
Right. He studied with Philo of Larissa, who was head of the academy, and also Antiochus of Ascalon, though Antiochus represents a bit of a break philosophically and location-wise.
The source talks about old, middle, and new academies. What's that about?
It's how ancient writers try to categorize shifts in the academy's philosophy over time. From Speusippus down to Philo, the big change was the move towards skepticism, starting with Arcesilaus.
Skepticism.
Yeah.
So they weren't always dogmatic Platonists.
No, definitely not. The academy under Arcesilaus, Carneades, and Philo was known for its skeptical arguments, questioning the possibility of certain knowledge.
Fascinating. But then things came to a physical end.
Yes, the Mithridatic War. The Roman general Sulla besieged Athens in 86 BCE and apparently destroyed the groves and buildings of both the academy and the Lyceum.
Destroyed them, like leveled them.
Used the trees for siege engines, apparently. Plutarch describes it. This really marks the end of the academy as a continuous physical institution tied to that specific location. Same for Aristotle's school at the Lyceum.
But the philosophical tradition continued.
Oh, yes. People still call themselves Platonists or academics. Cicero, Plutarch of Chaeronea much later, Proclus. The ideas lived on.
Didn't an emperor try to revive philosophy schools?
Marcus Aurelius, yeah.
Yeah.
In 176 CE, he set up paid chairs for Platonism, Stoicism, Aristotelianism, Epicureanism in Athens, but they weren't linked to the old physical sites, which were long gone.
And there was another Platonic school later in Athens.
Yes, in the 4th century CE, a Neoplatonic school was established by Plutarch of Athens, different Plutarch, though not at the original academy site. It had its own line of scholarchs like Proclus, ending with Damascus.
What happened to that one?
Emperor Justinian, a Christian, banned pagan teaching in Athens in 529 CE. That, plus Slavic invasions later in the century, pretty much ended that Neoplatonic revival in Athens.
So a long and winding history.
Yeah.
But The original Academy's legacy seems huge.
Absolutely fundamental for understanding Plato, his context, his concerns, education, politics, philosophy, and for understanding how his ideas were received and passed down, plus its role in shaping our whole idea of universities and academia.
The fact we still use the words academy, academic,
It speaks volumes, doesn't it? Right back to that grove outside Athens.
and you can still visit the site today.
You can. The area is called Academia Platonos. There are ruins you can see, and a museum of Plato's Academy, a direct link back.
Amazing. Okay, let's try to wrap this up for our listeners. Key takeaways from this deep dive.
Well, first, the Academy wasn't just Plato's invention. It grew out of a place with a deep history, sacred grove, gymnasium, public space.
Right, and it emerged within a context of existing Athenian education, paideia, which was being challenged and changed by incoming thinkers like the sophists.
Then there's the nature of Plato's Academy itself. Not a rigid school, more like a dynamic, evolving community of inquiry. A think tank, maybe, focused on discussion, diverse perspectives.
And finally, its incredible staying power. Not just the institution, but the idea of the academy, shaping education right up to today.
Indeed. Which maybe leaves us with a thought to chew on.
Go on.
Given how fluid Plato's Academy seems to have been, emphasizing open discussion and diverse views, how does that compare to academic institutions today, with their structures, departments, maybe even orthodoxies?
Is there something we can learn from that original model, that focus on community and questioning?
Perhaps. Something to think about.
Definitely. We really encourage everyone listening to dig into the source material, or even better, pick up some of Plato's dialogues. There's so much more there. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.